Greetings, this is Lama Tantrapa. Welcome to the sixth and final webinar of Qigong Coaching Certification Program, which is a part of the apprenticeship program at the Academy of Qidao. Thank you for taking this journey with me of several months, going through step-by-step exploration of the principles of Qigong coaching and their applications, and understanding how you can help other people become more effective in their lives, capable of manifesting their dreams, and overall happier and healthier. So today I would like to dive deeper into the principle of embodiment, because our methodology of Qigong coaching is one of the few coaching methodologies in the world that actually walks people through the process of embodiment and helps them actually walk the talk in terms of developing access to the states of consciousness that they need in order to perform the tasks that they need to perform, tap into the energy resources that they've been struggling to get access to, and most importantly, developing a new sense of identity, discovering for themselves who they really need to be in order to manifest and live their dreams. And as they step into the new identity of that person capable of manifesting those dreams that they have been harboring, they will be capable of actually making them happen and enjoy living those dreams. Of course, I want to give you a brief overview of what we've covered so far before I go deeper into the exploration of the embodiment principle. We've discussed how we can help our coaching clients to identify certain areas of strength and weakness in the current time. For example, we ask them to draw a pie chart divided into 6 slices. And each slice of this pie chart is associated with a particular part of their life. And we identified the 6 major parts or aspects of life, such as health and wellness, career and finances, hobbies and sports, personal and family relationships, social relationships and social contribution, and personal development and spiritual development. So, these 6 areas of life obviously are not going to be all balanced in most people's cases. Maybe you know that for yourself that you are not fully balanced at this present moment. I cannot claim that I'm always fully balanced either. But that's okay. It's just an invitation to pay attention to a particular area that is either underdeveloped or could use a little bit more attention and energy. Because where attention goes, energy flows. So, with that, we usually ask our clients to go ahead and create another pie chart, or just use the same pie chart, but for the second assessment. And that would be when we ask them to imagine what it would look like if they manifested the dream for themselves, what their life would look like and what different areas of life would look like, or how much satisfaction they would feel in those areas of life if and when they actually manage to manifest their dreams, the dreams of living more fully, more abundantly, healthier and happier. So again, we help them identify the levels of satisfaction with each of those areas of life, and then create a juxtaposition. Current state of affairs as opposed to dream state. Asking them essentially to recognize how much difference there may be between those 2 states of being if each of the areas of life that they're working on would feel like they're having greater level of satisfaction. They would feel like they are achieving greater harmony between those slices on the pie chart. So in other words, they live a more balanced life. For most people, this kind of juxtaposition, this kind of comparison between the current state and the dream state feels uncomfortable, and that's okay. As a matter of fact, it's often important to feel the discomfort because the person literally needs to feel motivated to get off their butt and start working on manifesting their dreams. The dreams don't just manifest for them, they have to do something about it. If they didn't have to do anything about it, they probably would be living their dream by now, right? So they need to feel a certain degree of discomfort or dissatisfaction with their own activities, or dissatisfaction with their course of action or course of life in general, or their sense of identity of who they are. And that's okay to not fully accept themselves yet. We will work on acceptance because that's an important aspect of our approach, that we actually recognize that we need to be able to pay attention to ourselves. And if we don't accept ourselves, we can't really pay attention to that which we're not accepting, because we are constantly judging or trying to get rid of it or trying to fix it or just pretend it's not there. So we need to develop some degree of acceptance. How do we do that? Well, we actually help our coaching clients achieve that by inviting them to practice one of several methods. One of them would be harmonizing polarities. The important caveat: this is not the practice that is okay to offer in the introductory session to your clients. I would never recommend offering the harmonizing polarity practice to the new client who is just about to sign on with you. I always suggest offering it once the person has signed on or started the coaching program. Why? Because it is very effective. And as soon as the person goes through this experience, they feel like, I already created this new sense of identity. I already feel like I'm connected with that way of being that is required for me in order to manifest and live my dreams. I don't have to do anything anymore. I don't need any coaching. So it's a faulty sense of self-recognition because they still have ways to go. Because at very best, they're halfway there. So we don't want them to fool themselves into this sense of achievement without having achieved anything. However, it's a very effective method for giving them a taste of what is possible, and also providing them an energy practice that they can do in order to achieve greater sense of inner peace. So a lot of people struggle in their lives. They suffer. They don't experience much peace in their lives, in their bodies, in their relationships. They essentially are not in the flow. We help people to achieve that state of flow, and this is one of the ways to manifest it. But we don't want them to jump into the assumption that they have figured it out too soon, because they will fool themselves. In other words, this is what they want, but it's not what they need. As you may recall, I briefly touched upon this distinction between people's wants and people's needs. We'll go deeper into that in our next module dedicated to the business development for Qigong coaches, because one of the key aspects of business development is sales and marketing. And we don't sell people what they need because they usually don't want that. What they pay money for is what they want, often not quite the same as what they need. However, we will help them reorient or refocus their attention so that they actually start wanting what they need through the process of coaching. So one of the reasons why people even need coaching is so that they would actually learn how to refocus their attention from their wants and desires to what they really need. Because if they don't, they may even get what they wanted, but as they say, be careful what you wish for, because you may even get it. And you will still have your needs unmet. So we don't sell people what they need, we sell them what they want. And then we help them transition or reorient their attention and their focus of energy. Another important aspect of our studies, of course, is understanding that there are different values that drive people. And often people don't know their values. They don't know what's important to them. They have some habitual wants, or they have some desires perhaps informed by the media or by their upbringing or a religious influence or whatever. But basically, they are depository of certain values. Especially as they were growing up as children, they were bombarded or exposed to all kinds of values that the adults considered normal and absolutely essential, but these people as children had no freedom of choice. They had no ability to actually discern, this is the value that really works for me, this is the value that doesn't work for me. So we also help them sort out and essentially reevaluate their values. How do we do that? Well, you may recall that we ask our coaching clients to actually create a list of their values and then go through that list and restructure or reorganize the priorities on that list, so that some values that perhaps used to be high on top of the priority list may get demoted to the bottom of it, or maybe even get excluded from that list at all if the person no longer feels resonating with those values. And some other values may actually be promoted to the top of the list or to a higher position on that list, so that basically they are recognized as more important ones. What will that do for the person? It will help them not only develop crystal clarity about their values, but also it will help them reduce or completely remove the inner struggle. The struggle that exists because some values may be conflicting with each other. And if they have conflicting values in their belief system, they will be constantly in the state of inner conflict or internal warfare, as I call it. And you can imagine how much energy it can take to have this internal struggle. It takes tremendous amount of energy. It's also what leads to people's development of the unconscious strategy for struggling against the flow. That's right. People have unconscious strategies for struggling against the flow. That's why they're often not in the flow. If they didn't have those strategies, they would be more often in the flow than they experience at this point in time. And we can look at the person and we can actually recognize that they have a particular strategy for struggling against the flow. How do we do that? We look at their holding patterns. We recognize that different states of consciousness manifest as different holding patterns. And so when a person, for example, is constantly depressed or feels a sense of guilt or just has low self-esteem, they will maintain a very specific holding pattern. In this case, it will be holding down pattern. And as you look at that person, you recognize, oh yes, this person has a particular state of consciousness that got so habituated that they don't even know that they're stuck in that pattern. They just think that this is the normal state of being. If the person, for example, is really conceited or just has very high self-esteem, perhaps even arrogance or a degree of narcissism, they may hold up. In other words, they're going to exhibit an opposite holding pattern. The pattern that also reflects that perhaps they have a number of other issues in their lives. For example, they may look down on others, and that doesn't help with developing rapport or harmonious relationships. So often people who have tendency to hold up have few, if any, friends. And what's interesting about it is that sometimes the person switches from holding down to holding up, to holding down to holding up. Sometimes they may actually try to mask their depression by holding up, by pretending to be an upbeat or self-confident person. So there is actually a medical diagnosis for that condition. It's called manic depressive. It's literally when the person flips a switch and switches from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness, sometimes polar opposite of that. When the person exhibits that condition or that trait, then we say that they have a combination of two holding patterns. Sometimes they exhibit one more prominently than the other, so that would be a primary holding pattern, and the other one would be secondary. Sometimes they have more than two. They may have another holding pattern, for example, a tertiary one, that adds an additional kind of a wrinkle into their system of holding patterns. For example, they may go through a holding fourth pattern. So they may be holding down and sad and depressed, and then they may get excited about something, and first they want something, or they may feel a certain degree of assertiveness or even aggressiveness. And then they may switch to holding up pattern. Or they may go from holding up to the assertiveness or aggressiveness and then hold down. So again, as they exhibit certain holding patterns, sometimes switch from one to another if they have conflicting values. Sometimes this happens so fast that it really can be observed as the person hesitating. For example, you ask your friend, would you like to go to watch movies with me, or would you like to go out to dinner? Seems like a really simple question. And if the person has any internal conflict, you may actually see how they're quite literally hesitating. It's like movie, dinner, movie, dinner, movie, dinner. It's like they cannot make up their mind. They have two conflicting values, each of them pulling the blanket, so to speak, onto itself. What it does, it essentially makes that person also a procrastinator. In other words, the person cannot make up their mind, so they don't do anything. That's one of the reasons why people procrastinate. Another reason may be that they have a severe judgment of something. They hold back. They may be holding themselves back, because not only do they have judgment of other people, which often is manifested in a somatic pattern of holding back, kind of like this. But they also unconsciously project onto other people certain qualities of themselves that they don't validate or don't even recognize within themselves or can't stand. And so they project them out. And then they judge somebody having these qualities, or maybe it creates the polarization between me on the good side and the other on the bad side. This is a perennial struggle between the forces of good and bad. This is something that has been ruining humankind for millennia. And we have the way to overcome this duality, this dualistic way of looking at things as if something is good and something is bad. You know, that I always talk about resonance as a much more intelligent and much more effective way to make decisions. These decisions are authentic, meaning they are not somebody else's decisions that have been kind of programmed or downloaded into your consciousness. You are not indoctrinated, you're not under somebody's spell. You are making authentic decisions based on your energy resonating with certain things around you, certain options or certain course of action or certain other choices. If something changes, and change is the most constant thing in the universe, so you are likely to experience change, or something around you changes, which again is very likely, this is going to be another opportunity to practice authentic decision making. In this case, again, it's going to be authentic, not only because it's yours, but also because it's not based on past experience. It's not something premeditated that you kind of just keep applying even though circumstances might have changed. You actually reassess the level of resonance each time you make a decision based on energy resonance. And that allows you to make your decisions in the most authentic and the most intelligent manner. You literally dispense with the whole notion of goodness and badness. Now, people who are brought up in a traditional Western mainstream culture sometimes are so indoctrinated in believing in the forces of good and bad that they would run away screaming from you if you tell them there is nothing good, there is nothing bad. Just get over it. So we kind of ease them into this awareness. And there are several ways to help ease people into this awareness. For example, one of them is to simply feel the tension in their bodies and go through testing. That's one of the very effective ways to develop authentic recognition of certain energy resonance and dissonance. And it's not good and bad, it's not black and white, it's always on the scale. And most things that we encounter are not at the ends of the scale, like polar opposites, either perfect resonance or perfect dissonance. No, it's most likely going to be somewhere closer to the middle of the scale. And that's okay. You literally allow the principle of relativity to be implemented each and every time. You remember that everything is relative. Things are not just positive resonance or negative dissonance. Everything is relative in relation to other options that exist at this particular moment in time. So if you compare several options, you may feel like you may resonate with one of them more so than others. But it doesn't even have to be 100% perfect resonance. It's just simply greater degree of resonance than the other options. Now, how do we help people dispense the judgment that some things are good and some things are bad? It is often also based on testing of how much tension they feel in their body. They literally become more relaxed and stronger when they resonate with something, because the central nervous system becomes less agitated, sending fewer signals of contraction to the muscles. And the tense muscles are not strong muscles, they are weak muscles. And the whole body becomes weaker when it is more tense. So you can literally come over and push them over with a simple push. As a matter of fact, that's what we do. When we work with our coaching clients face to face, we have an opportunity to push them around. We also can ask them to push us. And that's a fun adventure, because often people don't get enough opportunities to touch other human beings in their lives. It's almost like they are touch deprived. Well, it's not a healthy way to be, really, isn't it? We invite them to either test us or have a practice partner whom they can do some testing with. One person who's receiving the test basically is getting pushed. And the other person, the one who's pushing, we call him the pusher, uses a very specific methodology of performing the push using no force, just power. Placing the hand either on the chest, on the solar plexus, stomach, or other areas of the body. And just simply lifting the opposite foot. The opposite foot needs to be in front. So if I'm pushing with the right hand, my left foot needs to be in front of me. If I'm pushing with the left hand, my right foot needs to be in front of me. Whichever foot that is, I lift that foot off the floor, I will just simply start falling forward. Gravity will propel my body forward because I eliminated support of one of my feet. And of course my weight, as long as it stays more or less the same, will apply more or less the same pressure on the hand. Gravity also stays the same, as far as I know. That means we will have a very reliable method of testing that can be trusted. There is very little subjectivity in such tests. And who wants tests that are very subjective by design? No, thank you very much. We want tests that are as objective as humanly possible by design. And this is one of those tests. We also don't isolate particular parts of the body in a way similar to muscle testing, so-called applied kinesiology. We actually work with the entire body. But we can also test different parts, pushing into different parts of the body. I will bring it up in just a minute when I start talking about different energy centers. Why do we want to talk about different energy centers? Because you already know, and we covered that quite substantially in our previous webinars, that there are different energy resources that may be associated with different capabilities, different emotional states, different ways of communication. As a matter of fact, each holding pattern is associated with a particular state of consciousness. And those states of consciousness have a specific energy centers associated with them. What does it mean? It means that each energy center has a certain holding pattern associated with it. Now, how convenient is that? We understand that there are certain holding patterns and there are certain energy centers. And we recognize that certain states of consciousness are particularly suitable for performing particular tasks that people may need to perform in order to manifest their dreams. For example, if they want to communicate, they need to tap into a particular resource within themselves that would be responsible for communication, for being able to project their voice to be heard. What energy center would that be? Well, it's the energy center associated with holding forth. Holding forth is the pattern of tension that actually allows your voice to carry on. You can probably hear how my voice sounds differently now as compared to the way it sounds when, for example, I hold back. If I'm holding back, I'm in a very different state of consciousness. And this is not suitable for any kind of verbal communication or any other type of communication. Basically, I'm holding back my communication skills. I'm holding myself back from being able to reach out to people and be heard. Now, holding back is not a bad holding pattern. Sometimes it can be used for certain things. And what we discover for ourselves is that none of the holding patterns, just like none of the energy centers, is good or bad. All of them, again, have certain role to play. As a matter of fact, you can apply the same idea of the pie chart. So instead of higher chakras and lower chakras, we can be talking about energy centers on the pie chart that are neither good nor bad, They simply serve their roles. And if the person needs to tap into a particular energy resource associated with the task that they have at hand, they would be able to tap into it by assuming the holding pattern associated with that energy center, which will obviously also bring up the state of consciousness associated with that energy center and that holding pattern. Now you see why we talk about embodiment. We don't want to just tap into the states of consciousness and just imagine that we can be in those states. The states, for example, we explored in one of our recent webinars how we can learn a great deal. Well, in order to be in a learning state of consciousness, you need to embody this state of consciousness. If you don't embody it, you're just pretending to be in that state of consciousness, you're not walking the talk. So, in order to walk the talk, you actually need to tap into that state of consciousness energy center associated with the state of consciousness. And you will exhibit it through the holding pattern that has something to do with that energy center and that state of consciousness. You can even physically assume that holding pattern, and you will start feeling more capable of learning, or whatever the skills or abilities are associated with a particular energy center and corresponding state of consciousness. What does it tell you? It tells you that it matters where the energy finds home when we do one of our energy painting exercises. It does matter, but we don't want to tell people where that energy should be, because we want them to discover it for themselves. And it's going to be authentic to them, and it may also be subject to change. So it's kind of an interesting paradigm of thinking. We want the person to develop energy awareness associated with certain energy resources that they need to tap into. But we don't want to tell them where to look for those resources. We want them to discover for themselves where those resources may reside. And when they discover for themselves where those energies are, then they will be able to tap into them a lot more reliably. If you just tell them, it is not an insight, it's an outsight. It's basically a bit of information, as opposed to a discovery that they made for themselves. So it's very important to not just tell people everything about those energy centers that you already know. It's important to invite them to make their own discoveries. Support them on the journey of discovery. Answer some questions, but in a Zen-like manner. So if they're asking you, so which energy center is associated with the ability to learn very quickly? Instead of just pointing at that energy center, you say, well, wouldn't you like to find out? And let's do some exploration. Let's test. And how do we test? Basically, we invite the person to assume different holding patterns. And as they assume different holding patterns, they will enter a different state of consciousness. They will feel it. If they don't feel it, you can also invite them to focus their attention on their energy centers and discover which energy centers is associated with particular holding patterns. So kind of going in the roundabout way, but it's just as effective. As a matter of fact, this is going to be my Zen koan, this paradoxical Zen question for you, my friend. I want you to go through this exploration yourself. Now, of course, if you are going to make it to Portland, Oregon for the weekend workshop completing this module of our program, you will be able to do this with me face to face. If you don't happen to make it to Portland, in time for this workshop. You can definitely test with your friends or with your partners or with your neighbors. Just simply invite them to push you around. Now, when they're pushing you, ask them to push in a very specific manner. Remember, placing the hand on the body first, and then lifting the opposite foot and falling forward. Testing at different centers can go from above, or it can go from below. If you go from above, then you can ask them, would you push me into each of my chakras? Well, obviously we cannot push into the 7th chakra or the crown chakra, so we don't have to worry about that. But there is a way to access the 7th chakra, and we know how to do that, right? The 7th chakra is associated with the element of air energy center, which is the bubble surrounding our physical body. In order to be able to access it effectively, you need to be in a neutral state. And that's exactly what we're learning through this exploration. Now, let me explain. When we receive a push into each of the energy centers, we don't just switch from one holding pattern to another. We actually hold the same holding pattern as the person is testing each of our chakras. If you don't feel comfortable with a person pushing you into your perineum, the area between your genitals and your anus, you can ask them to push into your qua, which is basically the area in the hip crease, or into your tailbone, or from the side, right around where the greater trochanter of the hip is located. So basically the hip joint. And when you receive these pushes, you hold the same holding pattern until you've tested each of the 6 energy centers. Then you switch to neutral first before going to another holding pattern. Why? Well, it's just like driving a stick shift car, a car with a manual transmission. You don't go from the first gear straight to the second. You actually go from the first gear to neutral, then go to the second. Now, for example, if you want to go in reverse, you don't just switch to the reverse. You also go to neutral first, and then you go to the reverse. In other words, each and every time you go from one energy center associated with a particular frequency of consciousness to a different one, please reset by going into neutral. How do you do that? You know, the centering exercise, right? You just take a natural stance and do a little bit of rotation from side to side, pivoting to the right and to the left around the axis of your body, which goes right along the spine. The more the axis in alignment with the spine, the more the weight of your body will be distributed on the spine, on the bone structure of your skeleton, which means your muscles can relax. When your muscles relax, it means you don't have to spend any energy struggling against gravity. And the central nervous system also relaxes, because if it doesn't need to send signals of contraction to the muscles, it means it can actually take it easy. So this is a straightforward, a very no-nonsense way to get into a centered state of consciousness and a centered way of being physically. Then you can switch to a different holding pattern, and again ask your friend to push each and every one of your energy centers to find out what are we looking for. We are looking for the energy center that is weak, meaning just pushing into that energy center in the same manner as being used for pushing all the others will have a dramatically different result. Will actually either push you over or make you lose balance. What does it mean? It means when you are operating in a particular energy center or on a particular frequency of that chakra, you are using that energy. And if you spend a fair amount of time using that energy for holding yourself or communicating or doing whatever you're doing, you basically are going to start depleting that center. When a center gets depleted, it's not a strong energy center. It's a weak energy center. Now, weakness also goes hand in hand with tension. Remember, tension is not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness. What does it mean? It means there is going to be a band of tension or a certain area of tension surrounding that particular energy center. Where there is tension, there's going to be weakness. Where there's going to be weakness, you receive a push and you collapse or lose balance or get pushed over. So, for example, right now I'm going to demonstrate if I have tension in my neck. This is not a strong energy center right now. It's actually weak. Somebody comes and pushes me and off I go. It doesn't matter from which direction. They can push me from behind, they can push me from the front, they can push me from any direction. As long as they access this particular energy center, surrounded by the band of tension, they will push me over pretty easily. Now, if they push me in a different energy center, I'm not going to be weak. I'm actually going to be pretty stable and solid. But one energy center will always going to reveal that it's being used as long as the person is maintaining particular holding pattern. If the person has a combination of holding patterns, as we already discussed that, they may use more than one energy centers. So they will have more weakness. So the funny thing is that sometimes people say, well, isn't it better to use more energy centers? Or is it worse? Because if you use more energy centers, like if you use all 6 energy centers, are you going to be weak everywhere? I say, well, you actually are going to be balanced everywhere. If you use all the 6 energy centers, it's like using all the cylinders in your engine. You actually are not sputtering. They may not be working at the full capacity, each of them, but they're working in sync and you are not experiencing an imbalance. Now, what is essential is also to be able to access different resources, because throughout our lives we need different energy resources for accomplishing different things. Sometimes, for example, when we are experiencing certain challenges in the family or in relationships, or maybe we're making love, a different energy center may be required as compared to, let's say, the energy center associated with doing business. Well, unless you're a prostitute or a pimp, so maybe then it will be the same or similar energy used for both business and for sex. However, in all other circumstances, most likely, and in most spheres of our lives, we use different energy centers for different purposes. And as you understand by now, when we tap into particular energy resources, we can perform better at that particular task or in that particular arena. But we don't have the same task that we have to deal with all the time. There are some tasks that we may be good at and we just do them pretty easily. There may be some that we're not so good at and we may be avoiding them, or we may not even identify as someone who has the skill to deal with that kind of task. You know, for example, I was talking about communications, let's say speaking. Well, some people are actually seriously afraid of public speaking. In other words, they cannot tap into that energy resource within themselves. or at least they haven't been able to until now. And you can help them tap into the energy resources associated with public speaking. When they do that, they will feel unstoppable. They will feel like, wow, I have zero fear. Now, fear is associated with a different energy center as opposed to communications energy center. So what happens? We literally need to shift from the energy of fear to the energy of speaking or communication. How do we do that? We go through neutral. If the person doesn't know how to get neutral, all they need to do is they need to learn a centering exercise. But there is also a way for us to use holding patterns in a paradoxical way. Instead of telling them, okay, stop holding in, which is the holding pattern associated with fear, and start holding forth. We don't want to even tell them, stop holding in, get into neutral, spin until you get centered, and then start holding forth. Instead, what we do is we invite them to exaggerate the existing holding pattern, literally creating a short circuit, if you will. They will literally feel like, I can't use this energy center anymore. It's so depleted, I have to switch to something else. They basically get sick and tired of being the same person that they used to be. So when someone tells you that you need to let go of the person you used to be so that you would become a better person or a more capable person, but they don't tell you how to let go of that old identity, well, we actually go into it deeper. We literally exaggerate that holding pattern. You know, when you have tension, you can actually let go of that tension relatively easily by tensing up more first. If you don't tense up more, if you just try to let go of tension by sending signals of relaxation, it's really impossible, because there is no such signal as relaxation that central nervous would send to the muscles. Central nervous system can send more or fewer signals of contraction. What does it mean? It means that you can actually take full charge of the tension first. Because most people don't have conscious tension, especially chronic conscious tension. They would get really sick and tired of holding that tension if they just tried to hold it consciously for a few minutes. Because they would get really tired, quite literally, and sick of it and uncomfortable with it. But they often hold the same tension for days, weeks, months, years, maybe even decades. That's because they do it unconsciously. And so they can't stop doing that which they do unconsciously. Remember, in the beginning of our webinar, I mentioned to you that people have unconscious strategies for struggling against the flow of things. Well, I wasn't kidding. I said I will bring it up again later in the webinar. Well, here it is. These are unconscious strategies associated with particular holding patterns of tension in the body and certain states of consciousness associated with these holding patterns, and the energy centers associated with them as well. These strategies are so unconscious, people wouldn't be able to even verbalize them. Like, they don't have the words to express how these strategies work or what they consist of. They're completely unconscious. It's like, remember I talk about the tip of the iceberg as a representation of what we know about ourselves. But there are other parts of the iceberg hidden underwater. And there are a lot more parts of the iceberg underwater than the little tip that we know about ourselves. That little tip represents maybe 1/10 or 1/8 of the iceberg, maybe 1/6, depending on the density of ice and water. However, basically that means that what we know about ourselves and the sense of identity that we've developed, who we think we are, is far from being who we really are. What does it mean? It means we're not playing with a full deck. We often operate only on one or maybe two energy centers. We are running one or two cylinders in our engine, so to speak, or playing with just a fraction of the deck. If you want to change the world you live in and change yourself in the process, you need to be the change you want to see in the world. You also need more resources and more tools to be able to achieve that. If you're using the same tool over and over again, it's going to be a very deficient approach and basically will not allow you to manifest your dreams as much as you could if you had access to more resources. Well, you can tell that to your coaching clients. The exact same thing usually rings the bell, or people get it. Oh, okay. What I know about myself is not the entirety of who I am. And the entirety of who I am includes a variety of other resources, skills, and tools that I haven't been able to access. And that's the reason why we talk about embodiment. If the person can look in the mirror and see that they're holding themselves in a particular way, they will be convinced that you actually know what you're talking about. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to influence their thinking. You just simply say, well, look in the mirror. However, we use holding patterns and knowledge of different states of consciousness associated with them for a variety of other things. For example, we can just look at the person and we can assess pretty quickly what the person is capable of, because we understand what holding patterns they have, what state of consciousness they more likely are in, what energy centers or energy resources they're capable of tapping, what tools and capabilities they have. So essentially, you can understand the person at a much deeper level than most humans do. And is it important for a coach to do that? Absolutely. It's important for any human being to be able to understand other human beings better. But for a coach, it's of paramount importance. For a coach, it's also very important to do another thing. That's also something that any human being would be able to benefit from, but as a coach, you must know how to do that. And that is establish rapport. Rapport is that sense of connection and trust that other people feel towards you. You may also feel that towards them, but what's important is how they feel towards you, because that will determine whether or not they listen to you, they pay attention to what you have to offer to them, they actually take you up on your offers. How do we establish rapport? One of the obvious things about rapport is that it happens naturally among people who operate on the same frequency of energy of consciousness. So for example, if one person is scared, it'll be easy for them to relate to another person who is also scared. They have something in common. As a matter of fact, they have a lot in common. They have fear in common. If the person is scared and the other person is not, they often will not understand each other. In other words, the likelihood of rapport is going to be next to none. If they have some secondary holding patterns, maybe they can access each other's consciousness through those secondary holding patterns. For example, someone may be holding in, and at the same time, they may also be holding forth a little bit. Well, if the other person is holding forth and maybe holding out or down or whatever other manner, well, that's going to be at least some degree of connection. In other words, there is some overlap between the parts of the pie chart that one person uses and the parts of the pie chart that the other person uses. So, how do we connect with other people, and how do we engender greater rapport? Again, knowing holding patterns helps a great deal, because when you observe another person in a way that they're holding themselves, in a way that they express themselves, in a way that they use the energy, you can tap into a similar energy frequency and operate on a similar state of consciousness by getting into a similar holding pattern. When you have the flexibility or ability to change and adapt and adjust your holding pattern so that you fine-tune yourself and you meet the person at that level of consciousness where they're at, they will love you. It's not going to be just rapport, it's going to be affection. Why? Because they will feel met. And that doesn't happen very often among humans. Often people feel quite on the opposite end of the spectrum. That they feel unmet, misunderstood, or nobody cares about what they think. In other words, they're not validated. And you can validate them by being more like them. Now, the most paradoxical exercise that I often use with people I work with face-to-face is not only assuming a similar holding pattern, not only engaging them in exaggerating their existing holding pattern first. I ask them to help me get into their holding pattern. What does it do? Well, first of all, it gives them a permission to understand what kind of holding pattern they're exhibiting or they're stuck in. Secondly, I'm not judging them or telling them that you are doing it wrong or you're a bad person because you're stuck in this state of consciousness and this holding pattern that's just ridiculous. No, I actually say, I want to be more like you. I would like to experience what it's like to be more like you by tuning into a similar frequency of consciousness, using similar holding pattern, and experiencing the world through your lens or from your perspective. Often people say, no, you really don't want to be like me because I'm really screwed up. And I say, look, I'm not going to be stuck in your holding pattern. I want to experience it so I know what it's like to be more like you. It doesn't mean that I will become stuck in that holding pattern for the rest of my life. So please help me mold my body in a way that would basically match your holding pattern. And after the person starts moving my body, helping me assume a particular holding pattern that they are in, they start understanding much better what they've been doing to themselves. Because essentially they are moving me out of more or less neutral into an alternative holding pattern that is what they have been doing to themselves completely unconsciously. They are developing the interface between the tip of the iceberg and the rest of the iceberg. That interface is called awareness. Awareness is that quality of consciousness that allows you to get to know that which used to be unknown. In other words, if the tip of the iceberg, your identity, is what you used to know, you can connect with other parts of the iceberg, the unknown aspects of yourself, by creating a clear interface called awareness. And that's what you help your coaching clients do when you ask them, to mold or move your body in a way that would basically look like them. You will probably feel uncomfortable for some time because you're not used to their holding pattern. And most likely it's not going to be a holding pattern you will want to be in for an extended period of time. But you will also have much greater compassion for your client because you will feel really like, wow, you're really doing this to yourself? That's impressive. I'll try to be like you for a little bit, but if you don't mind, I will gradually shift out of this holding pattern into more neutral. Is it okay with you? Now what's amazing is that once you are in the same holding pattern with your coaching client, they establish rapport with you, or there is a rapport happening between the two of you. As you start shifting out of that frequency of consciousness, or basically shifting out of that holding pattern, they will feel like rapport is being lost. And it feels so good to be in rapport. It feels like a connection with another human being that actually cares about them and cares to learn more about them. That's amazing. I mean, our best friends often don't do this for us. But somebody is doing it. The coach does it. They will actually unconsciously try to catch up with you. Now, eventually it will become a conscious process. First, they may become more ingrained in that holding pattern, but then as you are shifting out of it, they will start opening up, and eventually they will experience less and less of that same holding pattern. And as you bring that to their attention, you can even ask them, so how does it feel now to hold yourself differently, since you've shifted out of your old holding pattern? Do you notice how you're also using different energy centers in the body? If they don't notice it, test it. Literally test their old holding pattern. So you can literally ask them, okay, let's go back to your holding pattern that you used to, whatever the holding pattern may be. Let's test. At least one energy center will be compromised or weak. And then as they shift out of that holding pattern into the newly discovered sense of freedom from tension, or at least less tension, being more centered, more neutral, you test them again. If they still have some holding, the same holding pattern, the same energy center may still be the weak one. If you push into it, they will still get pushed over, but I guarantee it's not going to be the same in terms of the degree of weakness. And very likely, they will actually not be weak in that energy center anymore. They may discover that another energy center may have become weaker. So in other words, they didn't shift quite into the neutral, they shifted into an alternative holding pattern. That's okay. They basically are exploring. What's important is two things. One, recognizing that they're no longer stuck in the old holding pattern, in the old state of consciousness associated with it, in the old energy center that they've been using all the time. And two, they discover that there is much more that becomes available to them in terms of resources, of energy, of consciousness, of the use of their body, as they open up to the possibility of using themselves differently and eventually developing a new sense of identity. Identity of a person who has much greater access to resources, more resourceful identity. Identity of being able to access much greater states of consciousness. So more conscious identity. Identity of a person who has access to a greater number of energy centers. More energetic identity. Identity of a person who is no longer stuck. the identity of a free person. Now, who wouldn't want that? If you help your coaching clients experience that and embody this experience and anchor it in their physical bodies and test them to prove to themselves and to the rest of the world that yes, there has been a significant change that they experience. Not just thinking about change, not just hoping the change is going to occur, but actually embodying the change. Now that is freaking awesome. People will want more of that. They will be knocking your doors down, wanting more of your coaching. How do I know that? Because I've been working with many people for years, because they experience such tremendous levels of transformation that they can't get enough of it. No, they want transcendence. So essentially what we're doing is we're getting people hooked on amazing transformation that they experience. It may not happen every session, although it would be nice, but it will happen consistently enough so that they will be able to develop a new sense of identity based on the new availability to life. And then we want them to develop a new culture of movement that would be associated with a newly discovered sense of freedom, centeredness, and ability to tap into the resources that they previously couldn't tap. What kind of culture movement would that be? Well, it depends on the resources that we're talking about. For example, if a person, let's say, was sad or depressed all the time, they will virtually always walk with their knees slightly bent, kind of shoulders slouched, the head stooped over. They're walking like a human question mark. And they often will be shuffling their feet or kicking the rocks as they walk. They often will feel grounded. And groundedness is a nice fringe benefit from holding down. But they will not be able to tap into other resources associated with other qualities. So, for example, if a person wants to become a public speaker, going back to our previous example, well, they may tap into the energy center associated with holding forth. And as they start holding forth, and the voice starts projecting, and they become more unstoppable, they will walk totally differently. They will move through life with greater strides. Quite literally, the steps will become longer. They will no longer shuffle their feet. It's likely that they will keep the weight towards the toes of their feet, which of course will cause various types of discomfort and potentially chronic pain in the calves. So I don't want to recommend that the person just gets into holding forth pattern and gets stuck in it. No, they get into it when they need to deliver a speech or whatever else they need to be doing to communicate, and then they get out of it. So they go back into a neutral state. Then I also don't want to say that they should never go back into the holding down pattern. Under some circumstances, maybe appropriate. For example, you competed in a championship and you lost. Well, it's okay to hold down for a short amount of time because you may feel sad about it. Or maybe you broke up with your girlfriend. Again, maybe you will be sad about it. But what I'm saying is that you actually may experience sadness on some occasions instead of just sweeping it under the rug, so to speak, and pretending that there is nothing to be sad about. It's okay to be sad. For example, if a friend or a relative or a parent or somebody else dies, it's acceptable and understandable to be sad or to grieve the loss of a friend or a relative. However, again, you don't want to be stuck in that grief for the rest of your life. So, what do? You express that sadness or that grief, and then you go back to neutral. How do you go back to neutral? Remember, if you do a holding pattern consciously, then you can get out of it consciously. And if you know how to get out of your holding pattern, you don't just go to a different holding pattern right away. No, go into neutral first. And then from neutral you can go to a different holding pattern as needed. In other words, then you become the user of those holding patterns, user of the tools associated with different states of consciousness, user of particular energy frequencies. You are the person who owns those energy centers. You own your holding pattern, and you are in charge of them. Now that's a very empowering way to address your tension, your pain, and whatever stuckness there may be in the mind. Imagine that you can help your coaching clients achieve the same thing. I know you can, because you have the tools now. And I also encourage you to do something very special. Before the weekend workshop, completing this module of our apprenticeship program, I invite you to grab a hold of a friend or a neighbor or a relative or anybody who would volunteer to be your practice partner and do some testing. As you are going through the battery of tests associated with different holding patterns and energy centers in the body, the chakras, you know that not only you will learn something, but your friend or your practice partner will learn a great deal as well. That may mean that that person will actually potentially want to continue receiving your coaching. So this is one of the easy and unassuming ways to actually recruit a coaching client. How to get more of that, I will share in our next module dedicated to business development for Qigong coaches. Until then, namaste.